He flatly refused, saying, "Go away, Satan." Have you had to face similar temptations? Or you might quickly answer, "No one has asked me to turn stones into bread or to jump off a tall building. Certainly no one has offered me the rulership of all the governments in the world." But notice, please, we said similar, not the same. So have you faced similar temptations? No doubt you have. Most of us have faced temptations involving fleshly desires. It may have been temptations to commit immorality, or temptations that appeal to greed or an unbalanced concern about material things. Other temptations may have appealed to our pride or tested our humility, or our desire to impress others. And who of us hasn't been tempted by opportunities offered to us by Satan's world for wealth, power, or position? No matter what temptation comes our way, though, remember Jesus' words, "Pray continually, so that you may not enter into temptation." But were those the only temptations that Jesus faced? No. How do we know? Well, notice Luke's words found at Luke chapter 4 and verse 13. "So the devil, having finished all the temptation, departed from him until another convenient time." Did Satan ever come back again to tempt Jesus? He must have, because of what we're told in Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15. Let's read that. "For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tested in all respects as we have, but without sin." Have you ever wondered what other convenient times Satan selected to test Jesus? Well, let's consider some possibilities. One example occurred in 32 CE, about 2.5 years after the initial temptations. Please turn to John chapter 6 and verse 15. "Then Jesus, knowing they were about to come and seize him to make him king, withdrew again to the mountain all alone." This seems like a similar temptation to what Jesus had already faced. But this time, the setting was different. Satan didn't directly offer the kingship to Jesus. There was no demand for Jesus to worship the devil. Rather, those following Jesus wanted to make him their king. This temptation was going to be by popular demand. How did Jesus react? Well, even before they could make their move, Jesus withdrew from them to a mountain just by himself. And what did he do on the mountain? We find the answer in a detail added in the parallel account recorded by Matthew. Let's read it together. It's Matthew 14 and verse 23. "After sending the crowds away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray." Yes, Jesus went there, not just to avoid the crowds, but to pray. The third question, what lesson can we learn from Jesus' example? Even though we may have passed the test or avoided entering into temptation in the past, we shouldn't be surprised if a similar temptation may arise again, but in a different form or situation and at a convenient time. For whom? For Satan, not us. Another occasion occurred when Jesus and his apostles were in the vicinity of Mount Hermon, near Caesarea Philippi. Jesus' apostles had just acknowledged him as the Christ, the Son of the living God. So Jesus took the opportunity to expand their thinking further. Notice what's recorded in Matthew chapter 16 and verse 21. "From that time forward, Jesus began explaining to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things, from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised up. What was the reaction of his apostles to this information? Let's read on in verse 22. At this, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Be kind to yourself, Lord. You will not have this happen to you at all." Although these words were uttered by a close friend, Jesus immediately recognized that they reflected Satan's wishes, not Jehovah's. So he firmly responded, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, because you think not God's thoughts, but those of men." Although this account doesn't specifically refer to Jesus praying at that time, we know that Jesus was a man of prayer. The Apostle Paul tells us in Hebrews 5:7 that during his life on earth, Christ offered up supplications and also petitions with strong outcries and tears. So no doubt those prayers helped Jesus to focus on the reason why he came to earth. That clear focus helped him to see that Peter's misguided counsel would only help to further the tempter's cause. What does this teach us? This shows us that temptations don't always come from those who are Jehovah's enemies. Some who are close to us will even serve Satan's ends unintentionally, as was the case with Peter. He could be an employer, a workmate, a schoolmate, a friend, a relative, a parent, a brother, or a marriage mate. Let's examine another example of how Satan returned to Jesus. This time, it was by means of the religious leaders. They attacked Jesus verbally, misquoting scripture and hurling senseless accusations at him. But Jesus understood what they were up to and frankly told them, "You are from your father the devil." We shouldn't be surprised if apostates and other opposers use similar tactics today. Just as Jesus was accused of blasphemy and political sedition, so too God's people have been labeled as extremists and have been the victims of all sorts of false accusations. Like Jesus, we remember who really is behind all these attacks: Satan, the great tempter. What will help us to avoid the temptation of giving up because of discouragement? How can we successfully handle all these type of attacks? Paul tells us what to do. We read at Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 11, "Put on the complete suit of armor from God, so that you may be able to stand firm against the crafty acts of the devil." After speaking about the importance of putting on the spiritual suit of armor, Paul goes on to say at verse 18 that this should be done together with every form of prayer and supplication, as we carry on prayer on every occasion in spirit. So what have we learned from our discussion? It seems that Satan didn't try again to tempt Jesus directly, but he was persistent. He kept coming back in different guises. He used others to give Jesus wrong advice, to oppose and ridicule him, as well as to try to make him a king. Perhaps we've rejected some serious temptations in the past, but remember, Satan doesn't give up on us just because he failed in the past. At a time convenient to him, he may come back to tempt us with something completely different, or the same temptation dressed up in a different form. So what's the key to not entering into temptation? We need to remember and apply Jesus' admonition. Pray continually so that you may not enter into temptation. So far, we've discussed how we could enter into temptation to do something wrong. However, we may also be tempted not to do something right. For example, Although we know that we should forgive another person for something they have done against us, perhaps we may enter into the temptation of avoiding that person and not forgiving them, even though there may be a basis for doing so. What can help us in such a situation? Again, the answer is pray for forgiveness. This is the theme of our music video for this week. It involves a very painful situation between a mother and a daughter. Let's see the role of prayer in starting to resolve what might seem to be an impossible problem.
I've got this grudge, I'm holding it in, but it's so heavy it pulls me down. I wish I could turn this around. I understand the need to forgive, but it's not easy if it's not my fault. These thoughts bring